I walked into my son's kitchen at 3 in the morning, looking for a glass of water, but I found my own death warrant instead. Spread across the cold granite island were fake prescription bottles and a competency form claiming I had dementia. The silence in that $2 million house felt heavy. I knew if I did not make my move right then, I would never have the chance to call 911. My name is Eleanor Marsh. I am 62 years old. And right now, I am standing in the middle of a kitchen that costs more than most people earn in a lifetime. It is 3 o'clock in the morning in Seacliff Heights, and the silence in this house is not peaceful. It is heavy. It presses against my eardrums like the pressure before a storm. I came down here because I could not sleep, thinking a cup of chamomile tea might settle my nerves. Instead, I have walked into a crime scene where the victim is still breathing. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was faint but distinct, cutting through the sterile chill of the air conditioning. It smelled of industrial strength, bleach, layered over something metallic and raw, like the scent of a butcher shop at the end of the day. I placed my hand on the kitchen island. The granite was freezing against my skin. My eyes darted up to the ceiling corner where the crown moulding met the cabinetry. A tiny red light blinked at me. It was a camera lens, no larger than a pinhead, hidden in the shadows. I had been in this kitchen yesterday morning, and that camera had not been there. I looked down at the expansive countertop. My stomach twisted into a hard knot. There was no tea, no mugs, no sign of the late-night snack I had expected to find. Instead, lined up with military precision, sat a row of orange prescription bottles. I picked one up, my hand trembling slightly. The label bore my name in bold black letters, Eleanor Marsh. But the prescribing doctor was a stranger, a name I had never seen in my life. I squinted at the dosage instructions. It was a high-potency sedative, the kind used to subdue violent patients in psychiatric wards. The instruction read to take 3 tablets daily. If I took that amount, my heart would stop before noon. Next to the lethal row of bottles, a tablet was propped up on its leather stand. The screen was glowing softly in the dark room. I tapped the glass, and my breath caught in my throat. It was an online form titled Elderly Dementia Assessment. It was 90% complete. According to the checkboxes, I was prone to violent outbursts, forgot my own name, and could not feed myself. Beside that tab was an open PDF document, comprehensive power of attorney. The beneficiary field was already filled out, Derek Marsh. A draft from the floor chilled my bare ankles. I turned to see the door to the small wine cellar under the stairs was slightly ajar. I pulled it open, expecting to see Derek's collection of vintage reds. The racks were empty of wine. Instead, they were stacked with fireproof security boxes. I opened the top one. It was filled with my life. There were copies of my bank statements, my investment portfolio, and the original deed to this very house. But the contact information had been altered. The email address on the bank profile was Derek's. The phone number was a burner line I did not recognize. I pulled out a document from the bottom of the stack. It was a mortgage agreement for the Seacliff Clifftop residence, the property held by my shell company, Aurora Ridge Haven LLC. I had never told Derek the name of that LLC, yet there it was. A loan document for $3 million against the house, and at the bottom of the page was a signature. It was my name, signed in a shaky, jagged hand that looked nothing like my own, but exactly like the handwriting of a woman losing her mind. Suddenly, a voice drifted from the living room down the hall. I froze. "Don't worry about it, man," Derek said. His voice was casual, Light. The same tone he used when ordering pizza. The profile is done. I just need the doc to sign off on the competency hearing tomorrow. She's totally gone. It's sad, really. I heard him laugh, a short, sharp sound. Yeah. Once the guardianship goes through, the funds unlock. $3 million. Easy. Then the house belongs to me. Legally. She won't even know she's signing the transfer. I gripped the edge of the granite counter until my knuckles turned white. I felt a cold sweat prickling on the back of my neck. I looked toward the glass-fronted display cabinet on the far wall, the one meant for fine china. Through the glass, I saw a black leather suitcase tucked behind a serving platter. The zipper was open just an inch. Inside, I could see the unmistakable beige bands of fresh $100 bills. Next to it was a stack of papers with a logo that made my blood run cold. Blackwave Capital. They were predatory lenders, the kind who broke legs when interest payments were late. I stood there in the dark, surrounded by the evidence of my own erasure. My son was not just stealing my money, he was erasing my identity, painting me as a senile invalid to cover his tracks with a loan shark. That is when I knew. I whispered to the empty room, though no sound came out. If I leave this kitchen without doing anything, I will never have the opportunity to call 911 again. To understand how I ended up trembling in a dark kitchen at 3 a.m, you have to understand who I was before the fear took hold. I am not just a 62-year-old grandmother waiting to die. For 35 years, I was a risk control specialist at Northfall Meridian Credit Union. My entire career was built on spotting the cracks in a story. I looked at spreadsheets and found the lies hidden between the numbers. It is the great tragedy of my life that I could spot a stranger's deceit from a mile away. But I could not see the trap my own son was building right under my nose until the cage door was already swinging shut. The house in Seacliff Heights was my pride and joy. I bought it 5 years ago with the insurance money and savings left after my husband passed away. But I was careful. I did not put the deed in my name, and I certainly did not put it in Derek's name. I purchased it through a shell company I created called Aurora Ridge Haven LLC. It was a habit from my years in finance. Keep assets separate. Keep them safe. Derek and his wife, Lila, moved in 2 years ago. They told me they needed the space to raise Murphy, their golden retriever, because children were not part of their plan. We just need a temporary landing pad. Mum, Derek had said, flashing that boyish smile that used to melt my heart, just until my investments pay off. I loved Derek, I really did. But he was the kind of boy who always looked for the shortcut. He was smart, but he was lazy. In his 20s, I paid off his credit card debt 3 times, each time. I told myself that he just needed a safety net. I told myself that he would grow up eventually. And then came Lila. She is beautiful in that terrifying, polished way that looks great on a screen, but feels cold to the touch. She is an influencer. She sells a lifestyle she does not own. I used to watch from the sidelines as she live-streamed in the living room of the house I bought. She would hold up her phone, panning around the ocean view. Look at this sunset. Guys, she would chirp, her voice rising an octave. This is what happens when you hustle 24/7. Dream home vibes. We built this with sweat and tears. She never mentioned that her mother-in-law paid the property taxes. I let it slide. Why ruin their fantasy? But there were moments when the mask slipped. I remember a dinner about 4 months ago. We were drinking wine, and Lila was laughing a little too hard. You know, she said, looking at me with eyes that did not quite smile. If Mom ever gets, you know, Lulu in the head and has to go to a home, we finally get the master suite for real. Derek laughed. I froze. Then I forced a smile and took a sip of wine. I told myself it was just a bad joke. But that night, I was glad I kept the house in the LLC. My father used to tell me that people who have never lost anything do not know how to keep anything. Derek had never lost anything in his life because I was always there to find it for him. I did not live with them originally. I had a small apartment in the city. It was modest, but it was peaceful. I only moved into the Seacliff house 6 weeks ago because I slipped on a wet sidewalk and dislocated my hip. The doctor said I needed recovery time. Derek showed up at the hospital, looking genuinely concerned. "Mum, please," he said, squeezing my hand. "Come stay with us at the coast. The sea air is good for you. Let us take care of you for once. You shouldn't be alone." I wanted to believe him. So I packed my bags. But the atmosphere in the house changed after the first week. Derek became jumpy. He would pace the hallway when his phone rang, whispering aggressively into the receiver, then hanging up the moment I entered the room. Lila stopped streaming in the open areas. She became obsessed with my medication schedule. "Did you take your pills?" "Mum?" She would ask every night, hovering over me with a glass of water. "You look so tired." Maybe you should take 2 tonight, just to help you sleep." The final warning sign came 3 days ago. I walked into Derek's home office to look for a book I had left there. The printer screen was lit up, processing a document. I leaned in to read the small display. The header read, "Proposal for Legal Guardianship. Subject, Eleanor Marsh." My heart hammered against my ribs. Just then, Derek rushed into the room. He slammed his laptop shut and stood in front of the printer. "Mum, what are you doing?" he snapped, his face flushing red. That is private work stuff. You can't just wander in here." "I just wanted my book," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well, it's not here," he said, guiding me firmly out of the room. "Go rest." "Mum, you look confused again." I walked back to my room, but the risk control specialist in my brain had finally woken up. That was the moment I realized my son was not protecting me. He was preparing to liquidate me. The afternoon sun was slicing through the blinds when Derek handed me the glass. It was filled with a thick, green sludge that smelled faintly of kale and heavily of something else I could not place. "Drink up?" "Mom," he said, his smile tight at the corners. "It is a calcium booster. Lila made it special for your bones." I trusted him. That is the pathetic truth. I took a long swallow. The texture was chalky, but underneath the sweetness of the fruit, there was a bitter chemical bite that coated the back of my throat. I tried to set the glass down, but within 10 minutes, the kitchen counter seemed to tilt sideways. My fingers went numb. My legs felt like they were filled with wet sand. "Derek," I mumbled, my tongue feeling too large for my mouth. I think I need to sit down." "You are just tired." "Mom," he said. His voice sounded far away, like he was speaking from the end of a long tunnel. "Come on. Let's get you somewhere safe." I felt hands on my arms, Derek on one side, Lila on the other. They did not guide me to my bedroom. They dragged me, my feet scuffing uselessly against the hardwood floor, toward the back of the house. The air grew cooler. The smell of dryer sheets and stale moisture hit me. The laundry room. Why I managed to choke out. "We have important guests coming tonight," Derek said, and for the first time, his voice held no warmth at all. "We can't have you wandering around confused. You will be safer in here." They deposited me onto the cold, tiled floor. I tried to grab the door frame, but my fingers would not obey. The heavy wooden door slammed shut. Then came the sound that cut through my drug-induced haze like a knife, the metallic slide of a heavy bolt sliding home. Darkness swallowed me. The only light was a thin, sickly yellow strip glowing from the gap beneath the door. I tried to push myself up, but my head throbbed with a headache so violent it felt like a hammer striking my skull. I dragged myself across the tiles, pressing my ear against the gap at the bottom of the door. I heard footsteps pacing in the hallway. Then Derek's voice, clear and professional. "Yes, doctor. It is getting worse." She locked herself in the laundry room again. "She thinks she is trapped. I am worried she might hurt herself." "Yes. Yes. I think the competency evaluation is necessary. She does not even know where she is half the time." My heart hammered against the cold floor. He was not just lying. He was building a medical history in real time. Then Lila's voice chipped in, shrill and excited. "Babe, I should start the live stream now. I will say, I am hearing noises. If I catch her banging on the door or yelling nonsense, it is proof." "Right. It proves she is unstable." "Smart," Derek replied. "Just make sure you look sympathetic. We need the narrative to be that we are the exhausted caregivers." I lay there for hours as the strip of light under the door turned from yellow to the grey of evening, and finally to black. The thirst hit me first. My mouth was like sandpaper. I used the dryer as a crutch to pull myself up to the utility sink. I gripped the cold metal handle and twisted. Nothing. Not a drop. I twisted harder, panic rising in my chest. The pipes gave a dry, hollow cough. They had shut off the water valve to this room. I looked around frantically. On the high shelf, bathed in shadows, sat a jug of industrial bleach. That was the only liquid in the room. If I drank that, I would be dead in minutes. And they would call it a tragic suicide of a confused old woman. I refused to die like that. I fumbled in the dark and found the power cord to the old washing machine. My hands were shaking, but I managed to loop it around the door handle, bracing my foot against the wall, pulling with every ounce of leverage I had left. The door did not budge. It was not just locked. It was barred from the outside. I sank back to the floor, exhaustion pulling me down. Through the wall, I heard the faint clinking of dishes from the kitchen. Derek was on the phone again. "Yeah, the appraiser is coming tomorrow morning at 9, he said. "The power of attorney is 90% done. Mum, she is gone. Man. She does not even remember her own name most days. It is just a formality now." I curled into a ball on the freezing tiles. The chemical taste was still in my mouth. This was not a family dispute. This was an execution. They were starving me of water, drugging my mind, and locking me in the dark so that by tomorrow morning, when the appraiser and the doctors arrived, I would look exactly like the madwoman they claimed I was. If I died in this room, Derek would grieve for a week and spend my money for a lifetime. I am Eleanor Marsh. I whispered into the darkness, forcing my brain to hold on to the syllables. I am not crazy, and I am not done. By 6 in the morning, the heavy fog in my brain began to lift. The drug they had spiked my smoothie with was strong, but my metabolism had always been fast. I was shivering violently on the tile floor, my throat parched. but the room had stopped spinning. I sat up, hugging my knees to my chest to conserve heat. My hands were empty, but as I patted the pocket of my wool cardigan, my fingers brushed against cold metal. It was my keychain. Derek had taken my phone and my wallet, but he had forgotten that I kept a spare set of keys in my gardening sweater. Attached to the ring was a small, multi-purpose tool I used for pruning small branches. It had a tiny screwdriver blade. I crawled toward the door. I did not try the lock. The deadbolt was solid steel. Instead, I jammed the small blade into the bottom hinge. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to be steady. I worked the pin upward, millimeter by millimeter. It took 20 minutes of silent, sweating effort. But finally, the pin popped up. I wedged the bottom of the door outward just a fraction of an inch. A thin stream of cool, fresh air rushed in from the hallway. I pressed my nose against the crack, inhaling greedily. It was enough to clear my head completely. An hour later, I heard heavy footsteps overhead. Then came the sound of the front door slamming and the distinctive roar of Derek's SUV engine fading down the street. They were gone. They were likely heading to the lawyer's office to finalize the paperwork for my involuntary commitment. I glanced at my wrist. They had stripped me of my digital life, but they had overlooked the old fitness tracker I wore. It was 3 years old, with a cracked screen, but it was still connected to the house Wi-Fi. I tapped the small display, navigating through the clunky interface to my synced emails. There was a notification from the bank, time-stamped 2 hours ago. Unauthorized access attempt. Aurora Ridge Haven, LLC. IP address, Seacliff Heights. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Derek was trying to brute force the password to the shell company. He was an amateur. He saw a big house and assumed he just needed a signature to own it. He did not understand the architecture of my assets. The house belonged to Aurora Ridge Haven, LLC. The LLC was wholly owned by the Marsh Evergreen Trust, and the trust had strict bylaws. Derek was a beneficiary only upon my death. While I was alive, he had zero legal standing. I sat back against the washing machine, the cold metal pressing into my spine. In the dark, my mind shifted gears. I was no longer a mother worrying about her son. I was a risk assessment officer looking at a failing portfolio. I formulated a plan. It had 3 steps. First, I had to get out of this room without alerting them to my clarity. Second, I needed to trigger the emergency clause in the trust. Third, and most importantly, I had to let Derek dig his hole so deep that when I finally pushed him in, he would never climb out. I thought of Harold Vega. Harold was my attorney, a man who charged $800 an hour and was worth every penny. Years ago, we had drafted a scorched earth provision for the trust. We called it the dissipation clause. It allowed me to liquidate the property instantly to a pre-vetted buyer if I was under duress, bypassing all normal probate rules. Derek had never read the fine print. I checked my heart rate on the watch. 78 beats per minute. I was calm. I am not dying in here. I whispered to the empty room. I spent 30 years killing bad deals on Wall Street. I refused 5 risky mergers that would have bankrupted the union. Does he really think a boy who could not manage a $5,000 credit card limit can outplay me? I looked at the door. I could probably pry it open enough to escape now, but that would ruin everything. If I ran, he would chase me. He would claim I was wandering. No. I needed witnesses. I used the tool to push the hinge pin back into place, leaving it just loose enough to be useful later. Then I curled back to the floor in the fetal position. When Derek opened that door, he needed to see a broken, confused old woman. He needed to believe he had already won. I would give him his performance. I would tremble. I would stutter. And I would wait for the exact moment he felt safest to destroy him. The bolt slid back with a heavy clank. The door swung open, flooding the laundry room with blinding morning light. Derek stood there, his face arranged into a mask of exaggerated horror. "Mum! Oh my God! Mum!" He rushed forward, grabbing my shoulders. I thought you were in your bedroom. Did you sleep in here, Jesus? I'm so sorry. I've been so stressed with the business launch." He did not wait for an answer. He shoved a glass of orange juice into my hand. "Here. Drink this. It has a mild sedative. Just to help you calm down." I took the glass with both hands, letting them tremble violently. I brought the rim to my lips, but before the liquid touched my tongue, I jerked my wrist, splashing half of the juice onto his expensive loafers. Oh no," I stammered, widening my eyes. "I am so clumsy. Derek, is it Sunday? Why is it so bright?" Derek sighed, wiping his shoe on the rug, but I saw the relief in his eyes. He believed the act. He believed I was losing it. "It is Friday. Mom, look, I have to take a call. Go sit on the patio. Get some fresh air. But don't go past the gate." "Okay. You might get lost again." "Okay," I whispered. Just for a minute." He led me to the back door and watched me shuffle out into the garden. As soon as he turned his back to answer his ringing phone, the shuffle disappeared. I straightened my spine. The fog in my head was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I walked briskly along the hedge line, using the shadows to hide my movement, and slipped out the side gate. I walked to the end of the block. A grey SUV was idling by the curb. The window rolled down, revealing the silver hair and sharp eyes of Harold Vega. I opened the door and slid into the passenger seat. The leather smelled of old books and mints. "You look like hell." "Eleanor," Harold said quietly. He locked me in the laundry room. "Harold," I said, my voice steady for the first time in 24 hours. He cut the water. "He has forged a power of attorney. He is bringing an appraiser in today to leverage the house for a hard money loan from Blackwave Capital." Harold's jaw tightened. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a tablet. "I know. My contact at the credit bureau flagged this at 6 Look." He handed me the tablet. It was an email thread between Derek's account and a broker at Blackwave. Subject: collateral verification. Body: the owner is non compos mentis. I will have full guardianship by Friday afternoon. Ignore the trust structure. I am the sole heir. Expedite the 3 million. "He is not just stealing," Harold said, tapping the screen. "He is committing wire fraud and elder abuse in writing." I looked at the email. My son was selling me out for a loan he could never repay. "We have to move fast," Harold said. "I suggest we trigger the sunset clause. I have the Reddings ready. They are a cash buyer family we vetted last year. They can sign a digital contract in an hour. We sell the house out from under him for 10% below market value, funnel the cash into the blind trust, and get you on a plane to Santa Fe tonight." "No," I said. Harold looked at me, surprised. "Eleanor, it is the safest play. I don't want to just escape," I said, staring at the dashboard. "I want to finish this. Call Agent Miller, the financial investigator from the Federal District." "Miller." Harold frowned. "Eleanor, if Miller shows up, This stops being a civil dispute. This becomes a criminal raid. Derek will go to prison for 10 to 15 years. He needs to come tonight. I continued, ignoring his warning. Derek is throwing a launch party for his fake company tonight. He wants an audience. Fine. Let's give him one. Tell Miller to wait until the house is full. Harold hesitated. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Are you sure? He asked softly. He is your son. Once we ring that bell, you can't unring it. I turned to look at Harold. I thought about the cold tile floor. I thought about the thirst. I thought about the way Derek had looked at me when he handed me that poisoned juice. I am not sending him to prison. Harold, I said. I am just opening the door for the truth. Who walks through it? That is his choice, not mine. The house was vibrating with the frantic, manic energy of a lie about to be sold. When I walked back through the side gate, pretending to be out of breath from a simple stroll, Derek did not even look at my shoes. He was too busy directing a crew of 3 men who were setting up a sound system in the living room. It is all about the optics. Lila, he shouted over the thump of a bass test. We are launching Kitchen Fund tonight. The pitch is democratizing high-yield investments from your own kitchen island. It needs to feel cozy, but aggressive. Lila was sprinting between the dining room and the kitchen, clutching a clipboard like it was a shield. She was overseeing the installation of a cocktail bar right on top of the island where, just hours ago, I had found my own competency evaluation. Now, the counter was covered in bowls of expensive lemons and stacks of prop money, fake $100 bills meant to look cute and prosperous. Babe, does this font look trustworthy? Lila asked, holding up a foam core sign. I want it to say, We are the bank now. I stood in the hallway, clutching my cardigan tight, watching them turn my home into a stage set for a felony. Derek finally noticed me. He rushed over, placing a hand on my shoulder that felt heavy and patronizing. Mum? Hey, he said, steering me toward the door that led to the small guest suite next to the garage. Listen, tonight is going to be really loud. Lots of important tech people, VCs, angels. You know, I just want to watch TV. I stammered, making my voice thin and reedy. Right, exactly. He nodded vigorously. But the thing is, these investors, they get spooked by unpredictability. So, Lila and I set up the guest room for you. It is quiet. You just stay in there. Okay, don't come out. We don't want you getting confused in the middle of a pitch. I let him lead me to the room. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited for the click of the latch. He didn't lock it. He didn't think he needed to, but he closed it firmly. I waited 10 minutes. I heard Derek yelling at the sound guy about microphone feedback. That was my cue. I slipped out of the guest room and moved like a ghost through the back corridor to my old master bedroom. The air smelled of Lila's perfume and desperation. I knelt by the antique bed frame, one of the few pieces of furniture they hadn't replaced with modern garbage, and reached into the hollow space behind the headboard. My hands found the cold plastic of a garment bag. Inside was my black Armani suit, preserved from my days at Northfall Meridian. Tucked in the pocket was my passport and the burner phone Harold had overnighted to the neighbour's address 2 days ago, which I had retrieved before the laundry room incident. The phone buzzed. A text from Harold. Reddington family has signed. Electronic transfer pending. Closing at 11 o'clock tonight. Condition immediate possession, including all contents. Blackwave Capital is in the dark. I checked the time. It was 7 o'clock. 4 hours until the house legally belonged to strangers. I crept back toward the kitchen, staying in the shadows of the pantry hallway. I could hear Derek on his phone. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Yeah, the appraiser just left. He is valuing it at 7.8 million. Conservative estimate. I will have the 3 million from Blackwave in my account by Tuesday. Look, I can promise you a first lien position on the title, my mother. She is handled. Just get the paperwork ready. He hung up. A chill went through me. He was promising a first mortgage on a house that was already sold. A few feet away, Lila was holding her phone up, finding her light for a pre-party live stream. Hey guys, she chirped, her voice dripping with fake honey. Just doing a final check for the kitchen fund launch. This house, God, it is such a blessing. It has been in my husband's family for, well, it is practically ours already. We are building a legacy here. Inheritance is just around the corner. So stay tuned. She spun around, panning the camera over the kitchen. The lens swept over the high-end catering trays, the crystal glasses, and the hidden drawers where I knew the forged loan documents were still sitting. The whole scene was a grotesque layer cake frosting on top, rot underneath. I slipped back into the garage room and locked the door from the inside. I stood before the full-length mirror. The woman staring back at me had grey hair and tired eyes, but her posture was changing. I stripped off the beige cardigan and the shapeless house dress. I pulled on the black trousers. They still fit perfectly. I buttoned the crisp white shirt. I slid into the structured blazer. I stepped into my low-heeled leather shoes. I looked at my reflection. The confused, trembling old woman was gone. In her place stood the risk control specialist, who had once stared down federal auditors without blinking. You wanted a show. Derek, I said to the mirror, you are going to get one. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the house was packed. It was a sea of navy blue blazers, Patagonia vests, and eyes that scanned the room for the next big opportunity. These were angel investors, crypto speculators, and fintech bankers, people who smelled money like sharks smell blood. Lila was in her element. She was perched on a high stool near the refrigerator. Her phone mounted on a ring light, live streaming to her followers. We are live from the Kitchen Fund, HQ, she shouted over the low thrum of electronic lounge music. Check out this demo area. This is where the magic happens. We are disrupting the mortgage industry from right here on the kitchen island. Derek stood on the raised platform of the breakfast bar, commanding the room like a preacher. He held a microphone loosely in his hand, gesturing at the expansive marble countertops. The home is the safest asset class in history, Derek said, his voice smooth and practiced. But why let banks hold that equity kitchen fund? Let's families unlock that value instantly. Safe, secure, transparent. I stood in the shadows at the top of the sweeping staircase. I adjusted the lapels of my vintage Armani blazer. It was a little tight across the shoulders, but it felt like armor. I took a breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs, and then I began to descend. I did not rush. I took one step at a time. The wooden treads were polished, and the sharp clack, clack, clack of my leather soles cut through the ambient noise like a metronome. A man near the bottom of the stairs, holding a martini, turned to look. Then the woman beside him turned. Slowly. A ripple of silence spread outward from the staircase. The music seemed to fade into the background. They had been told to expect a confused, frail old woman who shuffled in her bathrobe. Instead, They were looking at a woman who walked with the terrifying precision of a boardroom executioner. Lila saw me on her screen first. Her eyes widened in panic. She jerked the camera away from me, trying to hide the crazy mother from her audience. But in her haste, she panned directly across the kitchen island. The lens lingered for a split second on a stack of documents I had deliberately left, exposed the foreclosure notices and the loan application with the predatory Black Wave Capital logo clearly visible. Derek froze mid-sentence. He looked at me, then at the silent crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he stammered, a line of sweat appearing on his forehead. This is my mother. She is not feeling well today. Mum, please, let's get you back to bed. You are confused." He reached for my arm to guide me away, but I sidestepped him smoothly. I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. He was too shocked to resist. I turned to the crowd. I did not smile. I looked at them the way I used to look at loan officers who tried to hide bad debt in a bundle. "Good evening," I said. My voice amplified and crystal clear. "Welcome to the launch. It is lovely to see so many investors interested in my house." A murmur went through the crowd. "My son told you I was senile." I continued, locking eyes with a venture capitalist in the front row. He forgot to mention that for 30 years. I was the senior risk control officer at Northfall Meridian Credit Union. I stopped 3 mortgage fraud rings in this state before most of you learned how to tie your ties. And I am the sole director of Aurora Ridge Haven, LLC, the company that actually owns the floor you are standing on. Derek lunged forward. "Mom, stop it. You are embarrassing yourself." But before he could grab the mic back, a phone chirped in the pocket of a man near the window, then another, then 3 more. It was the sound of a synchronized notification pushing through the local real estate network. The man near the window looked at his screen, then at Derek. "I just got a title alert. The Seacliff Clifftop property. It just transferred ownership 50 minutes ago. Buyer is listed as the Reddington Family Trust." The room went deathly quiet. The air was sucked out of the kitchen. Derek's face turned the color of ash. He looked at his phone, then at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I stepped closer to him, speaking softly into the microphone so every single person could hear the intimacy of the betrayal. "Hey, Derek," I said. "If you are going to sell someone else's house to pay your gambling debts, you should probably check to make sure the owner is actually dead first." A nervous, uncomfortable laughter rippled through the room. The venture capitalist in the front row set his drink down on a coaster and quietly walked out the back door. He was the first rat to flee the sinking ship, but I knew he would not be the last. The double doors of the main entrance flew open, banging loudly against the interior walls. The sound cut through the murmurs of the crowd like a gunshot. Harold Vega strode into the foyer, flanked by 2 private security contractors who looked like they were carved out of granite. Behind them walked a middle-aged couple, Mr. and Mrs. Reddington, dressed in beige linen and looking politely confused by the spectacle before them. Harold stopped in the center of the room, holding a tablet aloft like a judge's gavel. "The electronic deed transfer is complete," Harold announced, his voice booming over the music that someone had frantically cut off. "As of 11:15 tonight, this property belongs to the Reddington Family Trust. The funds have cleared. The contract stipulates immediate possession, including all furniture, fixtures, and any items not explicitly labeled as personal effects." Derek scrambled off the bar stool, his face slick with sweat. He waved a sheaf of crumpled papers in the air. This is illegal, he screamed, his voice cracking. My mother is not competent to sign anything. Look at this. I have a preliminary assessment right here. She has dementia. She doesn't know what she is doing. Harold did not even blink. He swiped a finger across his tablet and turned the screen toward the stunned guests. Is that so? Harold asked, his tone dangerously calm. Because here is an email sent from your account to Blackwave Capital at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. In it, you stated, and I quote, "My mother is completely gone, a vegetable. I will have full control by Friday." You claimed she was incapacitated to get a loan, yet you are claiming she is competent enough to host a party. Which is it? Derek. Because either you are lying to the bank, or you are lying to these people. The Reddingtons stepped forward. Mrs. Reddington, a woman who looked like she baked cookies but managed hedge funds, peered at the kitchen island. She looked at the rows of high-strength sedatives and the forged power of attorney documents that were still scattered across the granite. "Excuse me," she said, her voice mild, but carrying a steel edge. "Mr. Vega, does the clause regarding contents included cover these illegal narcotics and forged federal documents? Because if they are now our property, we have a legal obligation to turn them over to the FBI immediately." A man in a cheap suit, standing near the refrigerator, dropped his drink. I recognized him. He was the broker from Blackwave Capital, sent here to keep an eye on their collateral. He was staring at the Reddingtons, and then at me. His face had gone pale. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed. "Boss," I heard him whisper harshly into the receiver. "The asset is gone." "Yeah. Sold. We are exposed?" No. I can't stop it." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The smell of expensive cologne was replaced by the stench of fear. The angel investors and tech bros began to back away from the kitchen island. They checked their phones, seeing the breaking notification that the property title had transferred. Whispers of money laundering and elder abuse hissed through the crowd, like steam escaping a pipe. A young woman in a blazer, who I knew was a freelance journalist for a financial blog, quietly pulled her phone out of her purse and hit the record button. Derek looked around the room, realizing the walls were closing in. He was cornered. He turned on me, his eyes wild with a mixture of rage and panic. "You traitor," he spat, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You did this. You planned this. I am your son. You stole my future. How could you do this to your own family?" Lila was standing behind him, frozen. The live stream on her phone had cut out, but the red recording light was still blinking. She was capturing every second of her husband's meltdown for a jury she did not know she was facing yet. I did not scream back. I did not cry. I stood perfectly still in my black suit, looking at the boy I had raised. "My future," I repeated softly. The room was so quiet that my whisper reached the back wall. "You locked me in a laundry room for 12 hours without water. Derek, I listened through the door while you told a doctor to declare me legally dead so you could optimize your tax structure. You were not planning my future. You were planning my burial." The silence that followed was suffocating. The only sound was the hum of the sub-zero refrigerator and the rhythmic thump-thump of a knife spinning on the counter where Derek had bumped it. The guests looked from me to Derek, the realization settling over them like a shroud. This was not a launch party. It was a crime scene, and I was the only witness who had refused to die. The last of the guests had scurried out the front door, like rats fleeing a rising tide. their luxury cars peeling away into the night. Now, the silence in the house was heavier than the noise had ever been. The kitchen, which had felt so expansive with its vaulted ceilings and open floor plan, suddenly shrank. It felt like a cage. The only people left were Derek, Lila, Harold, the two silent security guards, the Reddingtons, and me. We were trapped in a box of marble and glass. Derek moved first. He lunged toward the back patio doors and slammed them shut. He threw the deadbolt with a violence that shook the frame. Then he spun around, his eyes darting frantically, and rushed to the butcher block on the island. His hand closed around the handle of the 8-inch chef's knife. He pulled it out, the steel catching the under-cabinet lighting. But he did not advance. He stood there, trembling, caught in the paralyzed space between a temper tantrum and a homicide. Lila screamed. She grabbed his arm, her fingernails digging into his suit jacket. "Derek, stop. Don't be stupid," she shrieked, tears streaming down her contour-heavy makeup. She turned to me, her face twisted in a mixture of fear and accusation. "This is your fault. You did this. You act so holy. But you are the one who taught him to want more. You pushed him to be big. And now that he tries to make something of himself, you cut his legs off." Harold raised a hand, a sharp, precise movement. The two security guards widened their stance, unbuttoning their blazers to reveal the tactical belts underneath. But they did not draw their weapons. They understood the assignment. This was not an attack yet. It was a negotiation. I saw Harold tap the side of his radio, activating the audio recording. I walked slowly toward the sink. I placed my hands flat on the cold countertop, feeling the vibration of the dishwasher that was still humming away, oblivious to the standoff. I looked at my son. He held the knife like a child holding a stick he was afraid to throw. "The house is gone." "Derek," I said, keeping my voice low and even. "It is paper and wood, and it belongs to Mr. Reddington now. But you still have a choice. Put the knife down, be silent, and listen to me." "I can't." Derek screamed, his voice cracking into a sob. He waved the knife toward the wall of cabinets. "If I lose this house, Blackwave Capital will crush me. They don't sue people. Mum, they break them. That money, the money in the suitcase, I owe them double that. They will kill me." "I know about the money," I said. Derek froze. "What I know, it did not come from investors." I continued, my eyes locked on his. "I know about Mrs. Gable in Florida. I know about the retirement accounts you drained in Arizona. For 3 months, I have been collecting the emails, the voice memos, and the bank transfers. You weren't building a fintech company. You were running a Ponzi scheme using my name to bait people who looked just like me." The color drained from Lila's face. She looked at the smartphone she was still clutching in her hand. The screen was dark, but the realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The live stream. It saves automatically to the cloud. The papers on the counter, the cash, the drugs. If the police see that footage, if they see what was in the background, we are going to prison. You are already there." I said. "You just haven't heard the door lock yet." The kitchen was a wreck of conflicting realities. On the surface, it was a party half-eaten shrimp cocktails, crystal glasses, festive lighting. But underneath, it was a battlefield. There was the knife in my son's hand. There were the forged documents scattered on the floor. There were the illegal sedatives lined up like soldiers, and there was the suitcase of stolen cash hidden behind the pasta maker. Derek looked at me, and for the first time, he didn't see his mother. He saw the witness who had watched him dig his own grave. I knew then that the game was over. I just had to make the final move. I pulled the burner phone from the inner pocket of my blazer. It felt heavy in my hand, like a stone picked up from a grave. I placed it gently on the center of the kitchen island, right between the bowl of organic lemons and the stack of forged loan documents. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the refrigerator seemed to stop humming. I pressed the speaker icon, and then, with a steady finger, I tapped 3 numbers. 9, 1, 1. Derek stared at the screen, his eyes wide with disbelief. When the operator's voice crackled through the speaker, it sounded loud enough to shatter glass. 911. What is your emergency? I leaned over the counter, speaking clearly into the microphone. My name is Eleanor Marsh. I am 62 years old, and I am at 42 Seacliff Drive. I wish to report a grand larceny in progress, elder abuse, and false imprisonment. The suspect is my son, Derek Marsh. He is currently standing in front of me, and he is armed with a large kitchen knife. Derek snapped. He let out a strangled cry and lunged across the island, his hand grabbing for the phone. "Give me that," he screamed. "You crazy." He never reached me. One of Harold's security guards moved with terrifying speed, catching Derek's wrist in midair and twisting it sharply. Derek howled in pain. The chef's knife slipped from his fingers and hit the hardwood floor with a deafening clang that echoed through the open phone line. "Mom, are you safe?" the operator's voice demanded urgently. "I have officers dispatching now. I am safe for the moment," I replied, my voice calm. "But please hurry. I have evidence here of a multi-million-dollar fraud ring. My son locked me in a laundry room without water for 14 hours to simulate dementia. He has forged medical documents and is currently in possession of a suitcase full of illicit cash." Harold leaned in toward the phone. "This is Harold Vega, attorney at law. I am on the premises as a witness. We also have sworn affidavits regarding the forgery and video evidence of the suspect brandishing a weapon." While the operator kept us on the line, the Reddingtons quietly lifted their phones. They panned across the room, recording the scattered drugs, the cash, and Derek, who was now pinned against the refrigerator by the security guard. They were not just bystanders anymore. They were property owners documenting the contamination of their new asset. Then, the sound of sirens cut through the night air. It started as a distant wail and grew rapidly into a deafening roar right outside the driveway. Red and blue lights began to flash through the kitchen windows, bouncing off the stainless steel appliances and turning Derek's pale face into a grotesque mask of colors. Derek's legs gave out. The guard released him, and he slumped into one of the bar stools. He looked small. He looked like the little boy who used to hide under the table when he broke a vase, waiting for me to sweep up the pieces. "Mom," he mumbled, tears streaming down his face. You can't do this. Not to me. I am your son." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had watched me beg for water through a locked door and planned to sell my life to a loan shark. "You did this to yourself." "Son?" I said softly. "I just dialed a number. In fact, I probably should have dialed it a long time ago." The front door burst open. Police officers swarmed into the hallway, their radios crackling. They entered the kitchen with guns drawn, but quickly lowered them when they saw the security guards' raised hands. An officer moved toward Derek, pulling his arms behind his back. "She is crazy," Derek shouted as the handcuffs clicked shut. My mother has dementia. You have to listen to me. She doesn't know what she is doing." The officer looked at the calm woman in the black suit, then at the frantic man in handcuffs, and finally at the mountain of evidence on the counter. He didn't say a word to Derek. He just read him his rights. A young female officer approached me gently. "Ma'am, are you Eleanor Marsh? Do you want to step outside? We can take you away from this." I looked around the kitchen one last time. I looked at the stove where Derek used to clumsily make me pasta on Mother's Day. I looked at the fridge where a magnet still held an old photo of us on the beach. I watched the strobe lights of the police cruisers dancing on the ceiling. "Yes," I said, nodding slowly. "I am ready to go." I turned my back on the house, on the money, and on my son, and I walked out the door. 6 months later, I am sitting in a small, yellow kitchen in an apartment in Santa Fe. The morning sun is warm on my face. On the radio, the local news is running a segment about the sentencing of the kitchen fund fraudster, who received 12 years for wire fraud and elder abuse. I reach out and turn the volume knob down until the voice fades into silence. I pour myself a cup of Earl Grey tea and look at my phone sitting on the table. It is quiet. No one is tracking me. No one is waiting for me to die. I take a sip of tea. It tastes hot and clean. I lost a son. I whisper to the empty room. But I kept myself. That was the moment I knew I had finally won. Thanks so much for listening to my story. Please drop a comment down below and let me know where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, smash that like button, and hit the hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.